Greetings, everybody. This is Grant Carine, and your host of the leading sporting perspective grasping show, Shooting and Hooping. And my guest today is none other than the men's soccer head coach of Canoga Park High School, the great Jake Gwin, everybody. How's it going, Jake?
It's going great. Great to be back here, Grant. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for joining me here. Just a little background here before we dive into the questions. So, Jake here has led his team to 9 wins, 7 draws, and only 3 losses, taking his team to the CIF LA City Section Division 1 tournament. So, here's kickoff. What got you into soccer, and have you dealt with any other sport?
That's actually a really good question. There's a lot of answers in there, and we'll start with my background is all the sports. I went to Taft High School, and I was a varsity four-sport letterman in tennis, soccer, volleyball, and what was my fourth sport? Oh, baseball. Baseball. Duh. So baseball was actually my first love and my first sport. By the time I was a sophomore at Taft, I started to grow my hair long, and you couldn't have long hair playing baseball, but you could playing soccer, and I was pretty good at soccer. And I ended up playing collegiately and then playing, post-collegiately and kind of traveling a bit of the world and picking up a lot of skills, but I got my degree. So when I was kind of done playing, I went back and coached a year at Taft in 1998, I think it was my first year because it was my alma mater. And coached the soccer program. I took over the soccer program, wanted to get in coaching, and then left for one more year. I went and played in Arizona for one more year, and by that time I was getting to be about 30 years old, 31 years old, and I was in the substitute position in the field, and got a substitute position at Canoga Park High School in 1999, and they saw I had a degree in science and math, and it just evolved from there. I took over the soccer program probably that year, if not the following year. And I haven't left Canoga in 21 years now. And so that's kind of the short, long story of it. And so that's how I got into coaching. And then I picked up some club positions and then got my master's in coaching, and then was able to parlay that into a position as well at Moore Park College.
Wow, that's a great educational background. What a journey
Yeah.
that was for you.
It was a heck of a journey. Yeah, that's what it's about, right? That's what we preach. It's the journey,
Yep,
and if you can do as much as you can in that process and have a great journey. That's what we want.
that's great to hear, man. Who were some of your favorite players and teams growing up, and how have they influenced you to become the person you are today?
Okay, so it's funny because I had a Zoom meeting with my team last night, and I had just bought this book of my idol, who was at the time one, and it still is, probably top three all time. Pele called him the best player he's ever known, was Johan Cruyff. And even when I played at Taft, I took his number 14. I had his number 14 blazoned on my ring. And when I walked across the grounds at graduation at UC Davis, I announced myself as Johan Cruyff. My dad did not like that. It was one of those regrets. When I look back, I should have just said my name, because it was a proud moment for him, walking across a UC school, and I said Johan Cruyff. So, I just bought his book, his memoirs, and I'm reading it. And, he shaped a lot of how I identified with myself as a player. And then, all of the great Dutch players of the 80s came along, Ruud Gullit and Marco van Basten and Frank Rijkaard, and then Dennis Bergkamp were all idols of mine. And then, Jurgen Klinsmann, who took over our program. These are guys I tried to emulate. I was never nearly as good as them, even though I thought I was. And so they shaped a little bit of, my technical ability, my playing style. And then growing up in LA with the Hispanic community and the Iranian and the Armenian community was huge in my style as well. That was something that I think that still resonates with me. And I played in some of the Iranian games, the Friendship Cup, which is a big Persian kind of World Cup that I get called to play for all the time, and then even the Maccabee tournaments. I kind of am a mix of quite a bit of European influence and local Hispanic influence. I've got a lot of skill in my game, a lot of technique, with a lot of fight, a lot of grit, a lot of hard work. And these are things that I do try to sprinkle on my teams that I coach. I think I'm very fortunate to have had the playing experience as well as the growing up experience in the valley there, where it is a melting pot of a lot of different cultures.
Yeah, I can totally agree with you on that. Players like Cruyff and Lampard and those other great players have inspired people like you and a lot more people to play and love the sport of soccer.
That's right. That's what we want, is to have great role models to look up to, great human beings that we can, emulate on and off the field. And, again, I wasn't always the greatest role model in my younger ages, but, as I've grown up and I've had a family and I've got girls and kids and married and coach more kids, and, my Rolodex gets bigger and bigger, that part of that component of coaching and being a mentor, that role model part, that being a good human being part, gets bigger and bigger. And then all the other stuff, when you do things right, the winning, the championships, even the losing is okay. That becomes, more a byproduct of what you do as, I think, a human being and a good mentor.
Right. What would you say are some highs and lows of coaching?
Well, those are all really big questions to answer, because I think you could find a lot of highs in what you do. Well, we can start with the highs and lows just from a superficial standpoint. The winning is a high. Losing during the season isn't so bad because you learn from it, but the final game of the season, if it's not a win and it's a loss, that's difficult to deal with. And then some things that we just naturally have to deal with when it comes to life situations. I've lost a couple of players. I've lost 3 players in the last 3 years to car accidents.
Oh boy.
And hearing what's happened locally again with Moore Park High School students, I just don't know when some of these kids are going to get it. When they get in a car, it is a lethal weapon. And having to deal, having to run a memorial at school, which is, what I had to do this right before this last season. We were poised to have another championship team, and my best player, my top goal scorer, him and his brother were killed in a car accident, and I have to lead a memorial for the family and the mother. And these 2 were the oldest of the 6 kids in the family. And that's a low point. That's not something you ever want to experience. And, let alone losing some players to eligibility, and, maybe some kids leave and go to another school that you've invested a lot of interest. All of that pales in comparison to, having to watch some of these parents, these local community, parents having to bury their kids. I just don't think it gets any lower than that. And then, then the highs are, watching the boys grow up from freshmen to graduating, walking, crossing the graduation stage with a lot of pride. Hopefully they walk across that stage with the championship ring, but that doesn't always happen. And I've been fortunate enough to have it happen 6 times. It should have happened 7, but 6 times is good. And even in those great moments, whether they walk across with the ring or not, there's a lot of pride that I think we all have, particularly at Canoga Park, watching some of these kids come in as non-English speaking kids at all, and walking across that stage, some of them now going to CSUN or Berkeley and getting accepted, or maybe coming to Moore Park to play for me. I brought a lot of the kids over the years, the last 4 years there with me. There's a lot of great highs, great moments, that I think we can address. And I'm sure I've missed some of the highs, but, I think when we relate the lows to what we did, anything is good besides that.
I'm sorry to hear that, by the way, about what happened
Yeah.
to your players. It's I can totally agree with you on that when it comes to being a low. Losing players like that, especially that young. But
Yes.
I also agree with you on the highs where winning can be a big part for a soccer team. So
Yeah. When you're winning, everybody's happy. And when you lose,
exactly.
And when you're losing, though, that's when the coaching happens, right? And
Yep.
that's where you make your chops. That's where you grind in and really see what you're made of and what your team is made of.
Yep. It moves on to my next question. What introduced you to soccer? What made you want to continue playing the sport?
Yeah, growing up in the '70s in the Valley, soccer was there. But obviously we all know the narrative that's gone over the last 40 years with, soccer kind of being, a lower involved, lower mainstream kind of sport. And but in the '70s it was good because we had the 3 seasons. I played soccer in the fall, baseball in the spring, and basketball in the winter. And that was an excellent part of my development. And I think it went a long way to creating the skill set that I have. But I would have to say, and I just always go back to, I think I was a better baseball player than I was a soccer player at Taft.
Right.
I played baseball and soccer there. And in the late '80s, that's when kind of glam rock came along, and I started playing guitar, and then my hair started getting longer and longer. And in the mid to late '80s, this was the George Steinbrenner area. The New York, you had to be clean cut. You couldn't even have any facial hair, right?
Yeah.
So my hair kind of came out of the back of my hat, and I remember my coach there. He was an all-timer, Mr. Martinez. He said, "Son, you want to make this team, you need to cut that hair." And so I did that year, and I made the team. But I started to, listen to Metallica and Guns N' Roses, and, I was starting to play guitar and starting to, meander in those arenas. And I could do that as a soccer player, really show a little bit of my identity. And I started to get pretty good at soccer. I was a goal scorer. I could score a lot of goals. I was a first-team All-City player when I was at Taft, and parlayed that into UC Davis a little bit. I got into Davis because of soccer. But I didn't fall in love with the sport ultimately until I was about 20, 21 years old, where, something happened I just wanted to be better. I wanted to be like some of the other guys I saw. And I really started to own in on that and identify myself. And I wanted to be seen. And, there goes Jake Gwin. He's a pretty good soccer player.
Right.
That's kind of what I wanted. And so I really dove in with all feet. As soon as I got my degree, I took off. I went back east. I played some indoor soccer. I went and gave my hand down in Mexico. I lived in Guanajuato and León for the year. And that ended up being a great experience because I picked up Spanish really good. And working in Canoga Park, that's something that's really appreciated. You look at a white guy like me, a gringo like me, and I can talk Spanish, and I run my parent conferences in Spanish. Parents love it. The kids love it. So just, that's all part of that journey and that process. But that was one of the reasons I go back to why I just continued. I just wanted to grow my hair long.
Yeah, man, I couldn't agree with you more. Like learning more languages so you can communicate easier with the players so you guys can have a better understanding
Oh yeah,
with each
yeah.
other.
You should hear my Farsi.
I'm pretty sure
No,
it's great.
you don't want to.
Oh, okay. All right, which brings me to my next question. Most athletes have a favorite soccer skill that they love to use during games or practices. What are some highlighted soccer skills that you incorporate into practices?
Well, I think that, we're in a YouTube. I call it a YouTube generation.
Right.
They've watched Messi. They watched Ronaldo. They can sit there and they can press rewind and play. And there's every skilled coach out there. They're dying to judge now, unfortunately. And they like to sit there and they like to dance on the ball and do step overs, and I do too. It's fun. It's part of the fun part of the game. But one of the things that's you can be deficient in soccer by maybe you're not a great header of the ball, so you play in the midfield. Maybe you're a really good dribbler, and so they put you up top. Maybe you can't score goals, but you're a really good player. Maybe we play you in the back. So there's ways to mask, your deficiencies in this game. But the one thing that sticks out like a sore thumb that this YouTube generation needs to work on more, and a fundamental part of this game is passing. So, that's a skill. It's technique, how you use your foot, when to pass, when to pick your head. These are all things. So, the passing is a big part of my skill development. We can call it technique. You can call it skill. They're not mutually exclusive of each other. But, I like aggressive players. I like players to take on one-on-one, get after them, in those certain positions. But every player on the field needs to pass. You'll stick out. If you can't connect the pass, I don't care what position you're playing, you're not going to make it. So that's one of those things I really harp on with the kids, and put down the YouTube videos of step overs like Ronaldo or cuts like Messi. You're not either of them. Work on your passing, my friend. Your first touch and passing.
I couldn't agree with you more. My soccer coach back then, my brother's soccer coach, would say the similar things that you just said earlier. If you can't pass, there's no reason for you to even play the sport. Like you're not gonna be good if you don't know how to pass.
And part of that passing is being a good teammate. It's the family. You want to share that love. You want to share the ball. You've got other family members out there, man.
Exactly. Couldn't agree with you more. What made you want to start coaching soccer, and how long have you been coaching soccer?
I didn't want to teach either. My parents were teachers, and I just kind of fell in my lap. And I don't think I ever set out to be a coach. I think coaching at some capacity, and I'm lucky that I get to do both teaching and coaching. I've just been as fortunate as I can be to parlay my skills as a player into a career as a teacher and a coach, and again, parlayed it into a junior college position. I think it's just as you start to age, and you kind of like the income more than the playing, because back in the 90s, I mean, we were lucky to get $400 a month and maybe some extra money for running camps for the teams that we played on. I was lucky to play on some teams that they gave us condominiums to stay in, and so all we had to do was come up with food money, and even they helped us out with that sometimes. But then you hit 30, 32, and you start thinking about an income.
Mm-hmm.
And okay, so I want to get into coaching. How do I get into coaching? Well, I told you, when I got back from playing, I saw the Taft, that my alma mater was looking for a coaching position, and that was my first coaching gig, was coaching at Taft, in '98. And then obviously I went to play one more year, and it was an experience. I honestly, looking back, I really didn't know for me, coaching at that time was get stuck in, tackle, run order, and so that was a big part of my coaching repertoire. And then I picked up Canoga, and just like when I told you, as a player, I saw how I wanted to be seen was a good player. Then that evolved into, okay, no, I want to be seen as a good coach. So I dug in, and I read, and I learned, the classes weren't as available online as they are today. You had to really dig deep and read and connect. And I was lucky enough to early on, I just got off the phone with him, actually. I don't get a chance to talk to him a lot, but Dan Metcalf is one of the all-timers out there when it comes to coaches, in my opinion. And so he was a mentor of mine, and helped me, how to design training sessions, how to put passion into it, how to keep the players moving, and how to create a learning environment. And so then, all the rest just kind of evolved. And then winning my first CIF championship in a year after I had the worst team in the city in 2003, Canoga Park was literally the worst team. We won one game by forfeit. We were like 1-13, and I took that same team the following year, and we won our first championship.
Wow.
And that's just, the worst of first. And that was, just one of the greatest feelings that I can remember. How could this have happened? But that's part of the process, right? Is putting the work in, because when you do that, you do all those little things right, and you give everything that you can, whether you're a coach or a player on that field for 90 minutes, and you put everything you can, special things can happen. And that's what's beautiful about this game. And that particular year, really set a foundation for my success, the following years, winning another 4 or 5 it was again, I think I was in the right place at the right time a little bit. but then at the same time, I put my heart and soul into it, just like I did as a player.
Right. Like I couldn't agree with you more. The more you learn, the more you're gonna, I would say ace the styles of playing, and what you learn is gonna like get you to become better in the future.
Yeah, there's tests that come along. You can't just walk into that algebra test not having put in the work in the week and not having studied and done the examples and done the homework and expect to get an A. You got
Couldn't
to do
agree
that
with you more.
day in and day out. And I think that's what I did. And, I send that philosophy to my kids. Hey, the algebra is the same as soccer. You got to solve some problems. The quicker you solve those problems, the better test scores you're going to get, right?
Yep, couldn't agree with you more.
Yeah.
Which brings me to my next question. What are some highs and lows about coaching that you can offer insight to our listeners?
Well, I think there's going to be times in your when you coach over long periods of time. Maybe some who just didn't have the chops, they got out early from the lows. I talked earlier about losing early in the season. I learned this from Dan. He's like, they're not losses, they're learns, right? But obviously, you don't ever want to lose that last game. You try to win that last game. But there could be seasons where you lose more than you win, and you really call into question: am I a good coach? You have to struggle with the thoughts inside your head. You've got to struggle with some stuff, but out of that struggle, if you got it, then you just work harder to try to get out of it. And maybe not everybody has that personality to drive through and persevere and hope that everything comes out, or know that everything will come out okay in the end. So that's part of the struggle of coaching. You've got to be able to deal with losing. Maybe you've got some players who are outstanding, but just difficult personalities. You've got to be able to handle that stuff. And that's losing is not easy. I try not ever having the focus of winning or losing ever. I think we try to have some things in place structurally and culturally and fundamentally, and we let the results take care of themselves. But let's be honest, at the end of the day, no one wants to lose. Everyone wants to win. And that. So I've had some seasons where didn't go as expected. And then the things that I talked about in terms of losing some players to eligibility is a problem in high school. You don't have to worry about that in club. In club, you got to worry about when I was with Dan's team, DMS, we were what's called silver or silver elite, and you try to gain promotion. And you put a lot of vested interest in developing these players, and then you develop them, and then some of the higher level teams will come along and poach them because parents think that, just because it's a higher level team, it's going to be better. But that's not necessarily true.
Right.
You got to deal with that, and that's sometimes difficult to deal with. You always want what's in the best interest of the players and the families, and sometimes they just don't see it the same way, and that's one of those things that, if you let it get to you, and you do when you're a neophyte coach, you do let that stuff get to you. I've lost sleep. I've been angry. It's affected, sometimes the relationship at home, when you don't talk when you probably should talk. But as, I could say, Daily News called me a veteran coach recently, so I guess I could use that term. As a veteran coach, I keep it all in perspective now.
Yeah, I couldn't I could agree with you to the one part where you said that losing is like no one wants to lose at the end of the day because it's gonna hurt the person a lot, and it just makes them sad. But also, like your coach said, losing is like a lesson. You want to learn from it, fix that mistake so it doesn't happen again in the future.
And move on.
Exactly.
You can't live in that past. You can learn from it, but you don't want to live in it.
You wanna look forward, not back.
Yes.
Which brings me to my next question. In your opinion, what makes a good coach?
Well, I hope that this interview has given you a template, or people who ever listen, a template of, I'd like to think that, I'm doing things correctly. I don't always do them correctly, but my intention's always good. I know I've always looked like, I think the season's gone well, and the following season comes along, and I look back and I go, God, what was I doing? So, the qualities that make a good coach, from a technical standpoint, I think the environment that has to be created has got to be a learning environment. The field is the same thing as a classroom, and when coaches start to look at it as not a learning environment, I think it's a bit of a problem. You want there's trainers out there, right, and there's coaches. You can just put up a lot of cones and have them run around and say, do this, and you're working hard and you're touching the ball, and people think that that's coaching. But the coaching comes from both the training, but the instruction. Why are we doing this? How do we relate what we're doing in training to the games? And for me, we always start with fundamentals. I start with some basic principles, which is what's called, lower Bloom's taxonomy. It's just rote memorization, like your multiplication table, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know your 6 times 8, you know your 9. That's rote memorization, so that we work on these things early in the season. And as we move through the season, I try to get them up that pyramid to the top where they can take these things that we've learned that are fundamental and hopefully automatic by that point, and then they can become creative with it. Okay, how do we take these multiplication tables and these addition check and solve a quadratic equation or whatever you want to call it? Okay, so how do we take these drills that we've done, the passing and the trapping and the one touch and the overlaps and the patterns of play, and how can you become creative with it and relate it to a game situation where you can get the A on the test?
Right.
And so that's, I think there's a lot of coaches out there and teachers, hopefully, that could agree with what I say. And those are things that I think we look for in practices and games. Is there development happening? Are they learning from the losses? Or how do they handle the losses? That's part of it as well. And then I'll just, from an overarching perspective, I keep in contact with all of my players. I think every team that I've had over the years, I still keep in contact. They reach out to me. One of them reached out to me yesterday. He's getting into the nursing program at Cal State Northridge, and that's awesome. And I think when all's said and done, we can look at the championships, we can look at the training, we can look at the losses, but I think always when you look back, I think the testament of a great coach or the impact that he's had on children and youth and high school players is what kind of humans they've turned into 20 years later. Are they good fathers? Are they good parents? Are they good husbands? Have they given back to the community? Or do they have good careers? So along with all that technical stuff that I talked about with the training and the environment, the visceral stuff, like what kind of impact did they have on these children's and young adults' lives, in 10, 15, 20 years. And I'd have to say, from how players have reached out to me, young men now, with young families of themselves. I do feel just as proud as I have, if not more, than any of the championships that we won. Honestly, I can say that sincerely and honestly.
That's great. That's great to hear, man. That wraps up questions. Thank you for joining me, Jake. Would you like to add anything during the additional time we have?
Yeah, again, appreciate you having me on here, Grant. It's an interesting time that we're in right now. I know we're all going to get through it. Stay safe, stay healthy. If you're a soccer player, do things at home that you need to work on. Self-isolation. I know I do. If you can see, you guys can't see it, but Grant, I've got my training ground in the back here with my goal. It breaks up the monotony of the day. Exercise, whatever it is, whatever sport you play, have the passion, the desire, the motivation, and surround yourself with great people that have the same ambitions that you do, and go after your dreams. That's about all I'll say, because I never reached my dream of playing on the national team, but that process and that journey led me to this point, which is, it's a nice point to be at it. But just besides being locked up, it's a great point then, and I'm very lucky and fortunate to have the career that I have, and have been blessed to have coached the players that I've coached.
Some inspirational words from you, and I want to say thank you. Even though yes, we're in this crisis and how everybody is going through difficult times, I still want to thank you a lot for taking your time and doing the interview and being a guest. That's something that I really want to say thank you.
You're welcome very much, Grant. Thank you very much for having me again.
Yeah, thank you again for joining me on Shooting and Hooping. And that's all, folks.